Hello everybody. A warm welcome here to this event. My name is Leon Heuts, I'm the head of Studium Generale. What we're going to do today, I want to illustrate it with just 5 minutes I spent today just reading several websites. CNN, BBC, German's Frankfurter Allgemeine, and the Dutch NRC Handelsblad. And just a few headlines, and this is only 5 minutes of reading. As Trump reignites a trade war and faces a bond market revolt, the economy is about to go through the ringer this week. CNN. Also CNN. Trump threatens to cut off $3 billion in federal grant funding for Harvard University over its handling of anti-Israel protests. BBC. King Charles III will deliver a significant speech in Canada's parliament later on Tuesday, expected to offer support in the country's dispute with US President Donald Trump. Frankfurter Allgemeine, wir erleben eine Naturkatastrophe. Dutch NRC, Russian intelligence services are very likely behind large-scale data theft from the police. So that's in the Netherlands. There's only 5 minutes of just picking out some headlines. So it's clear that the world is undergoing a shocking changes with unpredictable outcomes. And this affects us all, including TU Delft. We can pretend it's business as usual, which is a common, I would say, cognitive bias, but we know this won't hold up in the short or long term. As a university, we need to make strategic choices, even in the face of uncertain future. And that's why I'm pleased that Strategic Foresight TU Delft and Studium Generale are collaborating on a new series called The University in Times of Crisis. And this is the first in the series, and we're opening strong, I would say, with our guest speaker of today, Rob de Wijk, founder of the Hague Centre for Strategic Studies, is one of Netherlands' leading experts on geopolitics and international security. His core argument, the global balance of power is shifting rapidly, and the world is becoming more fragmented and unpredictable. States are redefining their interests, alliances are under pressure, and international norms are eroding. His latest book, Het Nieuwe IJzeren Gordijn, The New Iron Curtain, How Power Politics is Returning to Europe, illustrates this. Following this lecture, there will be a conversation on the specific role and responsibility of TU Delft in this unpredictable and rapidly changing world, especially concerning military technology and dual-use challenges, for instance. Conversation partner Jeroen van der Hoven is university professor and full professor of ethics and technology at TU Delft, and editor-in-chief of Ethics and Information Technology. And Jeroen will briefly respond to the propositions put forward by Rob de Wijk, followed by a few discussion points, and there will also be time for questions from the audience. And we have a handheld, so I think we have to run very quickly, or otherwise I can repeat questions from the audience. So we're going to work like that. But first, the floor to Rob de Wijk. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and it's really a pleasure to be here. And I have to warn you, because I got a terrible cold, and I have to cough all the time, so don't worry about it, but sometimes I have to do that and drink a lot of water. What I would like to do is explain a little bit how the world is changing, and it's changing fast. That is nothing new, by the way. My first book on the changing world order, which is now so visible, I wrote in 2005. That's 20 years ago. So we are really a long time underway. It all started in 2000 when China became member of the World Trade Organization. And in the 1990s, everyone thought, well, if China is becoming a member of this organization, it will stick to the rules of the game. And it didn't. And due to the rise of China, and that's also in the first slide, if I'm not mistaken, yes. Due to the rise of China, we see that the world is changing very rapidly. That is a major geopolitical change that is happening right now. And I will explain that what Trump is doing is, in a way, a reaction to the fast changing world and the rise of China. So I will explain that to you, and I will also explain what is behind it and what we see right now and how are we going to deal with it, because what we see seems chaos, but it isn't. There is really order in the chaos. But the world is changing. If you look, for example, what happened in 1941, then the UK and the US, they agreed on a very important document called the Atlantic Charter. And the Atlantic Charter spelled out the world order based on liberal things. Political, liberal things like democracy, but also economic liberal things like market economy. That guided the Western world order over the last 80 years. And after the end of the Cold War in 1989, 1990, when 91 maybe, collapse of the Soviet Union, we see that this world order became more global. At least that is what we thought. But this didn't happen. This was also the time of Fukuyama, who wrote his famous book on the end of history, and he predicted that everybody is now becoming liberal. And what we now see in the US is also a backlash against that liberal world order, and there was already a backlash in China and quite a few other countries. So there is really something going on. This is now, if you look what's happening in China, this is now about state capitalism and autocracy. State capitalism means that the economy is politics. So there is a completely different way of looking at your economy, because we look at the economy from a perspective of free trade, and that is something different in China. I have a PhD student, and we had a meeting this morning from China and here, and it is so difficult to have an understanding about our worldview, because he is writing a dissertation on Xiangxia, which means the Chinese worldview, which is completely opposite to our worldview. It's quite interesting to guide his research. But on the other hand, it's extremely difficult, and we do not really know if we can finalize this thesis, because it's so difficult also for him to understand that something else is going on in this part of the world, that it's very difficult for him to write his thesis. But we will help him, but in order to explain that really different worldviews are now at stake. Mercantilism, for your own economy first, that's also a characteristic of the present world order. Transactional relations. You give me something, I give you something, and so zero-sum games are also quite important right now. And so what we see, and I started my talk by referring to this Atlantic Charter, which was, by the way, renewed by President Biden in 2020. That was during a G7 summit in London, or in the UK, not in London. And he confirmed this rules-based order, but this rules-based order is now going to change. The rule-based order is international law, is international institutions, so the central authority of, for example, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, things like that. That's now all under pressure. And what we also see now with the tariffs and the trade war that is emerging is that the classical free trade is now also coming to an end. And this was to be expected, that this would happen, because trade is one of the instruments of power you've got. You have in international politics, my field of expertise, you have two instruments of power. One is trade, the economy, that means tariffs, sanctions, things like that. And the other is military power. And both are two sides of the same coin. If you have a powerful economy, you will also have a powerful military. And for that reason, this is so important what's going on. And what is going on is linked to the fourth industrial revolution. Now, that's something that is quite important for this university. So what is it? Difficult, because you can't read this slide, but it's quite easy to explain. The fourth industrial revolution is the data revolution. So the first one was in the early 19th century. Then we had this revolution. There was the industrialization of the UK. Then the revolution moved from the UK to the US, mass production. Then at the end of the last century, we had this ICT revolution. And now we have the data revolution. So at the heart of this revolution is semiconductors, chips. But this is linked to fast internet, robotizations, artificial intelligence, and you name it. Now, if you want to destroy the power of another country, you can use this industrial revolution, or at least, for example, the chips, which are at the heart of the industrial revolution, to put pressure on a country. Now, it's it looks difficult, but it is not. So here, the lower part is about the critical raw materials. There are only 3 countries in the world that provide most of the critical raw materials to produce semiconductors. This is about coltan, it's about rare earth elements, palladium, things like that. The countries are China, Russia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is not democratic at all. So these are the 3 countries that are extremely important for the rest of the world to produce and refine the critical raw materials needed for the production of semiconductors. The semiconductors are produced in the upper layer. That is, for example, in this country, NXP or Nexperia, Intel in the US, and the biggest of them all, TSMC in Taiwan. Now you already start to understand what's going on here. Then the layer, the central layer, that's the tooling. That's, for example, ASML in the Netherlands, but it's also the producers of wafers, and which are needed to produce chips. Now you understand that if you do something with the critical raw materials in the lower layer, it works through the whole supply chain, and in the end you can't produce your chips anymore. This is exactly what's happening right now. Because of the trade war, the Chinese already imposed export restriction on certain critical raw materials like gallium and germanium. They also will do it on rare earth elements. So they are already using the flows of critical raw materials as a political instrument of pressure. Now, this is normal. The interesting thing is that this is an ecosystem. And if you look at what's happening around the world, also producing cars is an ecosystem. It's not anymore as, let's say, in the early 20th century in the US that Ford produced a car with locally available stuff. That is impossible. Everything is produced anywhere in the world. We don't know where it comes from, but it's huge. This is here you have the first problem for Trump. Trump has an old-fashioned idea about the economy and how things are produced. Everything is an ecosystem. So if you destroy the ecosystem, you have a problem. And that is already visible when he imposes the sanctions on for example, China. Here we already see that there is a big problem. And that's one of the reasons why he brought down the tariffs from, what was it, 145% to, what is it, something like 40%. Because he destroys the ecosystem. He destroys the global supply chains. Now, this is crucial, because if you destroy this ecosystem, we don't have an industrial revolution anymore. and we will have huge problems. This is also about war. If we have a war on Taiwan, we will probably lose TSMC as the main producing semiconductor producer in the world. That means that we here in the Netherlands or in Europe in general lose 60% of our semiconductors and 90% of the most advanced semiconductors. So there is really a big problem here. So this comes down to flow security. And there's also something that is completely different from the first Trump term. Flow security, this is also something we developed for the, what did I do? For the scientific council here for advising the government in the Netherlands. Flow security is related to everything that can be moved around the world, from people to money, goods, everything, raw materials, you name it. And that means that you can destroy a country if you want it, or attack a country, or put pressure on a country, just by slowing down the flows or blocking the flows. And that is one of the key problems we face today. So you don't need to occupy territory, but you can also put pressure on a country by just reducing the flows or attacking the flows. And that is what happens. Or you can create flows, and that is what the Chinese are doing through the Belt and Road Initiative. That's on the left-hand side. The Belt and Road Initiative is a kind of trade idea, but it's also political, because I explained a minute ago that what the Chinese are doing is state capitalism. So the economy is politics. And this is politics. So you create interdependencies with other countries, and you can try to maneuver yourselves in such a position that you really have political influence on a country. And that is exactly what's going on here. And this increases the global great power competition that is so visible today. So what you see is that quite a few countries now take advantage of the new situation. And those countries are usually not the most popular countries in the West. In North Korea, Russia, Iran, they all take advantage of the situation that emerges because of the rise of China. China becomes more powerful. That means, by definition, that the room to maneuver geopolitically for the US is constrained, and that the room to maneuver for China becomes bigger. And you have to take that into account. And if you don't do that, you're out. And that is exactly what's happening right now with Trump. Probably he doesn't recognize anymore what's going on and what the consequences are of his own behavior. I just came back from Romania. I had a meeting in Bucharest, met some guys from the Trump administration, which was great. I had a discussion with them, and I came to the conclusion: you have no idea of the reactions to your actions in this part of the world. You simply do not. You ignore it. And so I had more conversations with them, and it reinforced my belief that they have no idea what they are doing right now, because it is bullying on the one hand, but it is also trying to coerce others into a certain behavior. But if you do that, then the others will try to avoid it and circumvent this behavior and come up with something new. That's exactly what we are doing right now in Europe, and I will come back to that in a minute. So what you see here is that a couple of countries simply join China in order to create this new world. And this is a defining moment. So we know for quite a while already, for example, 2007, President Putin, during a speech at the Munich Security Conference in Germany, he explained already that he really wanted to get rid of this unipolar world led by the US. What he wants is a multipolar world, where he is accepted as one of the poles in this world. That's a big problematic for Russia, because it's a small country. It's not a small country in size, but it's a small country in terms of its economy and the number of inhabitants. The economy is approximately the size of the Benelux, Italy, Spain, something like that. So it's okay, but not for 140 million people, and the country which is the biggest one in the world. So then you really have a big problem. So he has to join forces with China, because they are on the same side. They both want to change this world order, both want world order that is not dominated by the US, and both want a world order that is more multipolar, so more decision-making centers in the world. This was on the eve of the Olympic Games in Beijing, early 22, and it was only a couple of weeks before the intervention in the Russian intervention in Ukraine, when the war started. And this meeting was an incentive for Putin to move into Ukraine. And that is something, this was completely missed in the West, that this happened. And they produced a report, or it was a report, it was a declaration, but it was more a report of quite a number of pages. And they explained what they want. And they explained how they hated the West and what should be done. And they do it right now. So Putin's war started, and that is really strange what happened. So I'm not going in all the details of Putin's war, but at the beginning of the war, it went pretty well for Putin. He attacked the country from the south and the north. He occupied large parts near Kiev, the capital, and he moved from the south to the provinces, oblasts, whatever you'd like to call them, in the south, and from Crimea and from Russia, he attacked that part. Now, what happened is that the Ukrainians they managed to kick the Russians out of the northern part, so the part near Kiev, and then basically nothing happened anymore. That's the reason why I wanted to show them to you. Since late 22, when the Russians lost parts in the southern and northern parts of the front, everything is static right now. Nothing happens. And so there is a stalemate. If you look on the ground what is happening, then if you read the news or the newspapers or watch the news, then you think, oh my God, they lost a lot of ground, but you even can't find it on the map. It's so small, the country's rather big. There was a calculation the other day that if the Russians would continue occupying the land they occupy now, it would take more than 100 years before they conquered the entirety of Ukraine. So it doesn't go well right now. So what you see is that Putin is now launching huge attacks on aerial attacks on Ukraine, but that is to compensate that nothing happens on the ground. At least too little is happening on the ground, and you win a war on the ground and not through the attacks, the aerial attacks that are so visible right now. What I want to say is only one thing. Putin believed that he could win this war within 2 to 4 days. That was approximately the idea. That didn't happen. If this happened, then indeed he would really move forward in creating this multipolar world. And then this would be a major success, and we would have been pushed, we the West, into a corner. And this did not happen because he did not expect the reactions of the West. So Putin shows lots of confidence because it goes so well, but in practice it doesn't go well. You never know in the future, but predictions are very difficult here. But so far so good. Over the last couple of days I spoke quite a few Ukrainians, members of parliament, but also military, and they said, well, we can do this for quite a long time. We produce most of the weaponry ourselves now, more than 50%. The Europeans do a lot. Maybe we lose the Americans, but we can manage. So I was quite surprised by that. But Putin is, of course, is confident, but this is more or less like hubris. Because what's happening, he lost a lot. Enlargement of NATO. Finland, Sweden are now NATO members. That's really quite something. What you see is that, and that's quite interesting, India is now on the forefront of this geopolitical struggle. Why is this? This is because countries like India are forced to take sides between Russia and Europe, America. And they don't want to do that. So the whole idea of non-alignment, which was very strong during the Cold War, is now again on the agenda. So the world is changing because of this Ukraine war. What we also see is that the southern republics of the former Soviet Union, the stans, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, countries like that, they are moving away from Russia. So that is also a loss. What you see is that the UN Security Council is almost dead. You can't reach decisions anymore because all the permanent members of the Security Council are now involved in this war in Ukraine. So this is also a big problem. So what he achieved, and he unleashed a quite substantial reaction from the West. So it's not really a success what he did from a geopolitical perspective. And what I know from my contacts with Chinese officials, they're not happy with it because they believed that picture in February 22, Xi Putin, that he indeed could do this within a couple of days. But he cannot. Xi cannot say, "All right, I turn my back now to Putin," because there is an overriding problem of this new world order, which should be supported not only by Putin but also by Xi. So what we have in this country, in this part of the world, we move towards a new Iron Curtain. That's the old one on the left-hand side, runs through Germany, East and West Germany. Now it moved to the east. And the big question is, on which side of the Iron Curtain is Ukraine? That's the key question. That's the reason why it is so important. If it is on the Russian side of the Iron Curtain, then we may have a problem. And I will explain why, because we need Ukraine, for example, to restructure our armed forces without America. But I will say a few words on that at the end. So this is really something that is going on. And then this one. Excuse me. I call it the second American Revolution, because this is really a revolution. So I take you back again to this famous transatlantic, this famous Atlantic Charter of 1941. This no longer exists. This is the end of it, especially not because President Biden renewed it, and President Biden is, of course, in the eyes of Trump, the cause of all the troubles the US has right now. So what you see is that there is a demise of the world order as it was developed by the UK and the US 80 years ago, more than 80 years ago. So what we see is the attack on the deep state. I'm not going into the details of this because it's not that relevant. We see the emergence of a kleptocracy or an oligarchy, and that means that very rich people are now really have an influence that is beyond expectation. But what is more important is that we go back to the 19th century. This is his idea. Trump's idea is an old-fashioned idea about spheres of influence, about power politics. This is what we did in Europe in the 19th centuries, when we had the kingdoms and the empires in Europe. There were agreements in the 19th century among the kings and emperors that they respected each other's spheres of influence, and it was quite stable. And this is also an idea that is supported by Russia. I remember very well that 2 months before the war, so that was the late 21, I was in Russia and I had to speak at a conference. And what happened there is that Shogui, at least because Shogui doesn't speak English, but his advisor does. And his advisor asked me, can you say something about spheres of influence in Europe? Because we believe that this creates stability. So, I'm willing to do that, but you won't like what I'm going to say. Because we Europeans believe that it's a right of each and every country in Europe to choose the institution or the political system they want. And we have an agreement on this, and that's the Charter of Paris, which was signed also by you in 1991. So I'm willing to do that, but it's not something you like. So he talked with Shogui, the Minister of Defense, and Shogui said, well, I don't want this. Okay, then I don't talk. Well, it's that simple, huh? And then he said, okay, well, please say it. But it showed me how important, according to the Russians, this whole idea of spheres of influence was. And what you now see with Trump is exactly the same. He wants spheres of influence. That is exactly what he's aiming at with Ukraine, with Moldova, but also other parts of the world. And that is 19th century. It won't work. It's completely opposite to what the Europeans believe is necessary in international politics. This is one of the reasons why it's almost impossible to have a good working relationship with Trump in the near future. We are drifting apart. We are drifting apart in terms of values. We are drifting apart in terms of geopolitical views. We are drifting apart in terms of defense. So this is really a big problem right now in Europe. Here, this is about values. So what happened here, it was really a big shock, This was a voting in the General Assembly on Ukraine. And here, for the first time in history, the Americans voted with countries like North Korea. And that is really a big problem. Syria, North Korea, what have you. So that is what happened here. And this was really a big shock in this part of the world, because if this happens, you place yourself at the wrong side of the line, and that means that you cannot have a decent understanding anymore with the Americans. And that's exactly what happened and what caused enormous reactions in Europe. So we are now heading towards a geopolitical reset, a transatlantic geopolitical reset. with big questions such as, is NATO still an organization that matters? Now, what happens is that we will have the NATO summit in The Hague. There will probably, as far as we know now, a very short communique and also a very short meeting of less than half a day, 480 million euros, by the way, on only one subject, and that is money. That is 3.5% GDP for defense plus 1.5% for different things like infrastructure and cyber. That will be the agreement. That will be the Hague Pledge. And the consequences are, of course, huge, because there will be no discussion about Russia or Ukraine. Zelensky will not be invited, as far as we know now. In other words, NATO is changing. And we simply do not know what will happen after the meeting, because if there is the Hague Pledge, then Trump can say, all right, now you spend so much money, you don't need us anymore. I leave you behind, and I did good things because I forced you to spend more than enough money for your own defense, and that's it. And remember that the president doesn't need to give up NATO, because that's difficult in the US, because it's ratified, so you have to unratify the organization. Can be done in practice, but he's a commander-in-chief. So the only thing he needs to do is not commanding his troops to defend Europe. And if he does that, then NATO is over. In my view, Macron said years ago that NATO is brain dead. In my view, NATO is brain dead again. So we have a problem here. This is also an attack on the world, on the European Union, because the European Union is only established to screw the US. That is obvious for Trump, which is of course nonsense. That's the reason why we now have this big trade war between the US and the European Union. So we have to find an answer to that. We have to find an answer to the new security order in Europe. We have to develop one. And normally, the EU and NATO is at the core of this new security order in Europe. But the question is, of course, is NATO still supported by the US? And what about the UK? Because due to the Brexit, the UK is no longer a member state of the European Union anymore. So what we see now is a completely different situation as we envisioned, and we now try to solve this problem through coalitions of the willing. It works pretty well, but it is also dangerous. So we see a new security situation emerging in Europe where we can do without America. That brings me to the European Union, because the European Union, if the Brexit didn't happen, the European Union would play a crucial role here, and it does. But not as crucial as when the Brexit didn't happen. So what you see here is that the leader or the president of the Commission, von der Leyen, she said time and again, we have to destroy this war machine, referring at Ukraine. What's happening here is that the European Union, and it's typical European, we have to reinvent power politics. Because you can say, we have to destroy this war machine, but how? I remember that she said this numerous times, dozens of times, I don't know how often, but this was a kind of catchphrase that was repeated all the time. I was in Bratislava the other day with a video call with Zelensky, and then she also said, we have to destroy this war machine. Then everyone, all the politicians said, yes, 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 we should do that. And the experts said, but how? How are we going to do that? The big problem of the European Union is that they do not know, that the Union doesn't know how to use the instruments of power, how to use your economic power effectively, and how to use your military power effectively. And why you can't use your military power, well, that's easy. That can be explained easily, because we neglected our military power for more than 30 years. So we are not effective here. And the question is, how are we going to do that? She also said a political union is born. That was 3 years ago. Well, not really, because a political union can only exist if you have an understanding of how to do power politics. And that is a slow learning process. And that's exactly, and we are now in the midst of this slow learning process. And then something happened what Putin could not achieve. This was all reactions to Putin. Of course, you have to defend your country, your alliance, NATO, European Union. You have to support Ukraine. At least that was the idea of the organizations, and it was supported by the US. But then something happened. The rearmament of Europe and the economic transformation of the European Union that was needed, and that should be a response to Putin. That didn't happen. It was a response to Trump. And that is quite remarkable what happened here. So Trump achieved something that Putin could not achieve. A change of mindset and a realization that and an understanding that we could not defend ourselves and that we had to completely restructure our armed forces and our economy. So all of a sudden, we started to realize here in Europe that the Draghi report, which is about competition, is indeed something that should be implemented. We start to realize that we have to invest in defense. A lot of money is now on the table, but the most important part of it is common loans. It is 150 billion. And then the European Union thinks that the countries, the member states, will come up with another 800 billion. But the 150 billion is common loans, and that is crucial. So we will loan that on the international, we will borrow that on the international capital market. And the question then is, what will this mean for the future? Because if we do it right here in Europe, then the common borrowing that will lead to an enhanced European Union. It will strengthen the role of the euro as a kind of reserve currency, and the consequences are huge in my view. So, what happened over the last couple of months is really quite impressive, and we see that a lot is going on, and we do this usually through a coalition of the willing, and that means that you can circumvent the US. You can circumvent also countries like Hungary, which have a completely different view on, for example, Russia. You can include a country like the UK. So you have a kind of a la carte Europe, which is quite interesting, but also quite difficult to understand how it works. So we now have a coalition of the willing and able of 30 countries, which are willing to deploy troops in Ukraine, including, for example, countries like Australia and Canada, outside NATO. Normally NATO should do that, but that is impossible right now. We have groups of countries that are trying to lead the whole process within the European Union. That's called Weimar. Weimar is composed of France, Germany, and Poland, which was established, by the way, in the 1990s, early 1990s. But they coordinate their policies, and they are now developing into a group of countries that is really taking the lead in the whole transformation process. So we see that a lot is going on, including, for example, the SAFE project, the joint loans. The UK is now taking part in that. So it is quite impressive what happened over the last couple of months. The big question is, of course, can we sustain the momentum? And that is something we simply do not know. So what we see here is the end in Europe of a postmodern era. What this means is this. Postmodernity is what President Trump would call woke, which is of course nonsense, but this is about the development of your society. This is about respect for people with, respect for diversity. This is about the promotion of democracy. This is not about power politics. And what we see right now in Europe is a reinvention of power politics. And that has huge implications for example, the restructuring for your armed forces. They were structured, and that's in the past, until very recently, for peacekeeping operations, for support operations, for humanitarian aid operations, and now you move to war fighting. And that is something completely different. And that requires a completely different view on your armed forces. And it also requires a completely different view in your society on the use of your armed forces. And for that reason, we now have discussions about, for example, the mobilization of forces. So it is and conscription. So it is really changing right now. So what we see here is the end of 30 years of moral politics. We always did peacekeeping operations, not very successful, and now we have to move to something completely different, and that has huge implications for your armed forces. You have to turn them into war-fighting forces, and you have to restructure them from peacekeeping forces to war-fighting forces. When I was in the 1990s in the Ministry of Defense, I had to deal in those days with the paradigm shift from the Cold War to the new era. The minister asked me to restructure the armed forces in those days, long time ago, and we did. And we turned them into forces for stabilization, peacekeeping operations, or what have you. Now we have to go back to something that comes pretty close to what we had during the Cold War. And my institute and I personally am involved again in this new transformation process. So you move from one paradigm to the other. What are we going to do then? If you cannot rely anymore on the US, you have to look at like-minded countries. Like-minded countries are countries you share a lot with. Now, well, the US is now a problem, but most of the countries that are dark blue, well, belong to our club, that's the European Union, but also countries like, let's say, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, Canada, they belong to that club. Then the light blue countries, it really depends on who is in charge. Take, for example, Brazil. Brazil was a country under Bolsonaro that placed itself outside the international order. Now with Lula, it's the other way around, and we can do business with Brazil. So quite a few countries. Israel is also one of them. It really depends who is running the country, and what the outcome of the voting process in the country is. So, but the big problem is the yellow country. Are the yellow countries? They are opposite to our values, to our economic system, to everything we believe in. The problem is that most of the critical raw materials are in those countries. So we have to, and that brings me back to this fourth industrial revolution, we have to think in completely different terms about those countries. That means that we now see a less moral foreign policy, a foreign policy based on power politics. Am I happy with that? No, not at all, but that is the consequence of the major geopolitical changes taking place in the world. So, what do you want, for example, in Europe? Do you want to be a player or a pawn? You tell me. If you want to be a player, you have to adapt. I will not discuss all the all the issues here, but you should change your mentality. You should enhance resilience. That's exactly what's happening right now in Europe, and it starts here. By realizing that something is changing, you have to improve your defenses. You have to change the decision making. For example, in the European Union today, there is a discussion again on Hungary, and Article 7. That means that Hungary, there is an attempt to remove Hungary from the decision-making process. It probably fail because you need unanimity for that, and countries like Slovakia are now on the same side as Hungary, so that probably fails. But there are different ways of working working around Hungary, for example, through the coalitions of the willing and able. Now you have to make Europe, that's obvious, economically robust. That's exactly what's going to happen anymore. An overstretch is quite an interesting one. Overstretch means that is aimed at Russia. So the Russians have this completely different political and strategic mindset. Every time they are confronted with a threat, they at least confronted with a perception of a threat, they spend more on defenses. Now then you have a big problem because this country is small, the economy is small, and you cannot go forever. So the whole thing might collapse if if you react on the defense investments in the West by similar investments in in Russia, then this could lead to overstretch, and overstretch is a typical way of destroying a superpower or a major power. That is from history. We know that overstretch usually leads to collapse of major powers or great powers, whatever you like to call them, and Russia is one of them. So the consequence of this, of the war, and the reactions also caused by Trump, is that we now see a situation where the Russians probably cannot sustain their defense efforts anymore, and then the whole thing could collapse. That's a traditional and historically explainable situation. But we have to beware of an overreaction. If you don't do that, you get an arms race, and that is also very counterproductive. And this is the conclusion. Who is this? Darwin, yes. So this is survival of the fittest. There's not the strongest will win, but the most adaptive will prevail. That's exactly what's happening here. So adaptation means that you have to adapt your mindset, your view on geopolitics, your view on defense, your view on your economy. That is adaptation, and that is something I try to promote everywhere, because you have to adapt. You have to acknowledge that something is going on, and that you have to adapt in order to be able to defend your security and your economic prosperity. That's what you should do. So the situation is not hopeless as long as you are able to adapt yourself to the new situation. I'm not that negative about the future, but we have to adapt, and that's what it is. I would like to stop here.
Rob, thank you very much for this very intriguing story, and overcoming so many obstacles, illness and technical obstacles. So that's great. That's fantastic. I would like to ask Jeroen for a short reaction. So we can. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. You two should. Yeah. I'm afraid you have to change mics. It's the way it is. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So thank you for this wonderful overview. I've read in preparation for this conversation. I read your new book, which I can highly recommend. It was really a page turner, a beautiful oversight of geopolitics in the last, at least 100 years, with a focus on the recent time.
Yeah.
And I have to say I agree with all of that. It's not my, I was refreshing my memory of all the things that transpired. And I think I can agree with a lot of the things that you say. There is one thing that I'm slightly uncomfortable with, but I think you're right in putting that center stage and turning that into a problem, which is and it was in one of your slides, this is the value dimension, or the international norms, the erosion of these international norms, and what should be our position vis-a-vis ethics, idealism, in a world of, where I think you're right to point out, is a world of power, politics, and is trying to get the whole stack from rare earths to the high-level services. And so that makes me wonder. I think you rightly criticize decades of naive promotion of humanitarian interventions. You've studied, I think it's similar to a point that was made, I think, 20 years ago by a Dutch philosopher, social critic, Hans Achterhuis, the politics of good intentions. Yeah. And we know that the way to hell is paved with good intentions. So there's always this problem that we are, jumping to conclusions. We want to do good. You say that the spirit in many of those, looking at those military confrontations, was we have to do something. So that is correct. What I also see, and I think it's a little bit of my experience in Brussels as an advisor to the European Commission, is that they are, and I think you also said, I'm not pessimistic, there may be some good developments, that they're rising to the occasion. For example, you mentioned the Draghi report on innovation. There's another report that was commissioned by von der Leyen to a Finnish politician, former on safety and security in Europe. The Minister report. It was outsourced and commissioned to a Finnish guy because the Finnish have thinking about power and about security and safety in their DNA. They have been exposed to the threat of the Russians, so everyone is prepared to fight a war and to take up arms against oppressors. So I think that's part. Also, putting your money where your mouth is, really kind of mobilizing, quite a bit of money to rearm Europe. But that still leaves the problem on the table of how we should integrate what Europe cannot possibly deny, and that is, what is a constitutive element of what Europe is, as long as it is Europe? That is an agreement on two constitutive charters. That is the Convention of Human Rights and the Charter of Fundamental Rights. If Europe is anything now or in the near future, it has to be an agreement on that. These are constitutive and defining treatises and sets of values and norms. So whatever we do, left, right, or center, we will have to innovate and adapt while holding and taking sets of norms and values serious, which means rule of law, democracy, and human rights. We know that outside of Europe, as you have shown, there's not much interest in these, except the New Zealanders and the Australians and the Canadians and the Japanese, perhaps. And so we have to, come to agreements with them and collaborate with them. But that is something that we need to think about. I agree we should move away from naive idealism and say, oh yeah, we have to do something. But in ethics, you take Kant to task in one of your chapters. Immanuel Kant, zum ewigen Frieden, right? Oh, let's make the world a peaceful place forever. That's great, that's a wonderful idea. But Kant was also the one who invented or highlighted the importance of one principle, which is ought implies can. We cannot have a moral obligation without, the ability to do something. If I cannot save people in distress or rescue people who are captured, if it's physically impossible, it's no obligation. It cannot be an obligation for me to do so. So we have to come to, to grips with what are the facts on the ground, what are the numbers, and our ethics can only be realistic and applicable and pragmatic and helpful if it comes to grip with those facts, and it is an accurate grip of the facts. So I think we agree, but still there is, of course, for us, Europeans, people who subscribe to those fundamental principles, the question, how can we reconcile holding on to those fundamental norms and principles and values, while at the same time preparing and dealing with the realities of a world of power and geopolitics as we see it evolving and unpacking before our eyes. And it is exemplified, I think, in the, you also discuss it in your book, this famous and often quoted saying, already goes back to Roman times, si vis pacem para bellum, right? If you want peace, prepare for war. Now, that exemplifies the tension, I think there is, because we want peace, right? But it's a simple want, it's a desire. Oh, let's have peace. But preparation for war is a quite different mental state, because then we're talking about military campaigns, acquisition of the needed resources, etc., etc. So that is a different mindset. Now the question is, how can we reconcile those two different mindsets of I want peace versus prepare for war in a very meticulous and pragmatic way? It's to me, it's more like, it's almost like, you know, you're in a marriage and you say, well, you know, in order to have a good marriage, prepare for divorce, right? So that you see where the tension is. One undermines the other, because if you're really serious about preparation for a divorce, I think that requires a quite different mindset than the one that is required to have a good marriage. So I think that's one of the tensions that is for me key in your yeah.
No, I completely agree. That is absolutely true. We've been thinking at this also at my institute, and we were asked by Wopke Hoekstra, the then Minister of Foreign Affairs, what to do about it. And we came to the conclusion, this years ago, not very recent, but that's 4 years ago, something like that, that do not abandon your own values, your own principles. Don't do that. Stick to it. Stick to the international rule of law. Stick to the rules-based society. Don't abandon it, especially not within the European Union. And for that reason, I'm very much interested in the outcome of today's Article 7 discussion in the European Union, in Brussels. I don't believe it will work, but okay, let's see what happens. But stick to the rules. But what we did over the last couple of decades, we also used principles, values, as an export article. That is really problematic. When you have a new world order with multiple power centers, then this is no longer sustainable. I can give you an example. 2 weeks ago I was in Saudi Arabia, and we had a discussion about how to deal with Trump. They already have an experience with that. Because in 2019, the Houthis carried out attacks on Saudi Arabia, and they destroyed part of the energy infrastructure. The authorities in Saudi Arabia believed that they would be assisted by the Americans. But President Trump said, no, it's not my problem, you're attacked, I'm not. This has caused a complete revision of the Saudis' foreign policy. And that is also a problem for us. The Saudis now say, we have a choice. We can either choose for Russia, for China, for Europe, for the US. We are extremely pragmatic. We don't care what kind of system it is, but we are extremely pragmatic in our choices. This is also a problem for the European Union. we are now confronted with countries that can choose. They can make their choice for different political systems. This is one of the reasons why in Africa we lost our position. So we have to be, and that is part of the answer, and I think that quite a few people won't like it, but we have to be extremely pragmatic in our choices. In my view, we can make choices for countries regardless their political system, but as long as they stick to a rules-based world order, it's okay for me. But we can't be too critical anymore, unfortunately. And remember that power and values are two sides of the same coin. If you are strong, then you can impose your values on other countries. If you're not strong anymore, or you face relative decline of power, it's completely different. And then you have to be more pragmatic. And that means that you simply cannot use your values, your principles, as an export article.
Yeah. Now, so another, I think, good sign Europe is, losing its naivete in this respect is the focus on what is called the Euro stack.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this having a minimal viable stack where you control from the rare earths, hence the deals with other parts of the world, South America, it could be supplying some of that to cloud facilities. Of course, the chips and the telecom infrastructure, Nokia and Ericsson, is already very strong. ASML in the Netherlands is very strong. So you have, when you play this game between member states in Europe, and you see what you can do and what you're missing to have a minimally viable Euro stack, and gives you a lot of control and less dependence on other parts of the world. That is a good illustration of the thinking that is now, I think, emerging, as you pointed out, thanks to Trump. I think everyone is on full alert now that this needs to be done. Yeah.
Could I play the idealist here, just for let's get Fidel. I mean, the idea of preparing for war also provokes a kind of reaction from other countries. Yeah. You see this in Finland already, of course, where Russians now move the bases to the NATO border with Finland. Yeah. So preparing for war is, even if you stick to your own values itself, is already a problem, because you get a reaction from other countries.
Yeah, but sticking to your values, it's also defending your values. So you have to prepare for war in order to defend your values, your prosperity and your security. You have no other choice. Mm-hmm. And that is something we forgot over the last couple of decades. But coming back to your point of the Eurostack, I fully agree. It is extremely important, and it is related to the whole discussion on strategic autonomy. How much autonomy can we achieve? And this brings me back to the discussion on semiconductors, and where do we get the raw materials from? For example, part of this thinking is the Critical Raw Materials Act, requiring us to, let's say, trying to mine some 15 to 20% of the raw materials in Europe. That means 80 to 90% not. Mm-hmm. So autonomy is almost impossible, and that relates to your question, which is not naive, but you also should remember that if you are so dependent on your critical raw materials for your economic development from other countries, you have little choice. And that reinforces my argument that you can no longer use your principles, your values, as an export article, because that will go at the expense of your own economic development, but ultimately also at the expense of your own security. Mm-hmm. And remember that most of the critical raw materials you need come from China, or they are in components you need. So life is made not easier because of geopolitical shifts that are taking place right now.
Yeah.
Could I bring the topic to we hear the technical
To the universities,
community?
yes, I would like to propose that also.
Yeah, so I mean, does this moment in time, do we also have opportunities? I mean, so Trump is alienating large parts of the academic community, and so we have funds, or we're supposed to have funds to accommodate academics who are looking for academic asylum here in Europe. Does that offer, to your opinion, opportunities also to create a kind of an exchange money? So if what we're missing in terms of rare earths, I mean, so we could build a little bit more, expertise that is required?
Oh, if we can do it and get researchers from the US to Europe, we should do it. I know already quite a few of my colleagues, quite a few, 3 or 4, but they are quite well known in the world, who already moved to Canada.
Already too late, perhaps. I mean, with
too late.
With starting a fund and getting.
Yeah, but the fund is not that big. It's $500 million. So it's a lot of money, but a researcher also costs a lot of money, as we all know.
Yeah.
So you talk about a few hundreds. And it really depends, because it's maybe 100 to 150 million euros a year. So it's a lot of money, but you simply cannot do that much. But you have to do it. So I think it's a great idea to do it. But I think more important are the consequences for America itself, because this will contribute to the relative decline of the US. If people move away, and if you destroy the deep state, and you have all kinds of ideas about ideology, and you try to steer a country based on ideology, we know what happened with the Soviet Union, because it reminds me quite. It reminds me to what I saw in those days in the Soviet Union. That's what you try to do here as well, and guiding your country and governing your country based on ideological principles never worked, and it will not work in the US too. Moreover, it will provoke reactions, for example, here in Europe, and I mentioned the breakthroughs that are already visible. What we see something similar in Africa right now. US aid has been abolished, and it has huge implications already for Africa, positive implications, because too much aid also makes you lazy.
And what are the chances that within 3 years' time, or after the midterm elections, we have a completely different world, and Trump is driving the US-American economy into the ground, and people will be bitter and twisted and disgruntled, and they want to see an end to this all. And
we go back to the old world order.
And so
no. First of all, the geopolitics are changing. So we see power shifts. The structural underlying current is power shifts. This will only accelerate the power shifts. In my view, Trump is an accelerator for change, and the change is already visible for quite a few years. So the rise of China will continue. The world is changing. So after a couple of years, the world will change further. You cannot turn back the clock anymore. That's one thing, and that is because it is related to geopolitics. The other one is that the destruction of what we see right now is so big, and the consequences are so huge, that also America cannot turn back the clock anymore for Europe. As far as we know now, the Europeans move ahead. And that is because the American system can produce twice a president that doesn't really care about transatlantic relations, and that really destroys the trust in the institutions we have and destroys the trust in the liberal world order we developed together 80 years ago. Now, the consequences are huge, and even after the midterm elections in the US, I don't believe that this will have huge implications for us, because the trust is gone. And trust is one of the most precious commodities in international politics. If the trust is gone, it will take a very long time before it comes back.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I would like to change the subject to the TU Delft itself, being a University of Technology within this new world of power politics, etc. Yeah. We are developing military technology, of course, here at the university. We're working together with the defense, etc. What now in this new world order would be, and with all the ethical questions coming, which come with working on military technology? Yeah. So, what would be the core political or ethical points we have to consider as a University of Technology? I know it's a huge question, but
no, it's.
You want to go first? Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah. Well, it's your subject. Autonomous system, for example, is a very interesting one. Autonomous system, and also handing over the decision-making procedures to the computer, is a huge problem. Mm-hmm. That is the so-called OODA loop. So there's the whole loop from observing something to action. Yeah. In the good old days of the Cold War, it took, let's say, 6-7 hours. Now it takes 6 nanoseconds. You cannot interfere anymore in the autonomous decision-making procedures we invent if the adversary doesn't do it. So that is really a big problem. Should you work on it? Well, that remains to be seen, but if we don't do it, we will buy it somewhere else. Mm. So that's one of the issues. What we also see is that we have a combination of old and new on the battlefield. So we end up in Ukraine in a battlefield that looks quite similar to the First World War, with new technology like drones. And this is extremely important for technical universities. For example, if you use drones, then the innovation cycle is now 2 months. So that means that, for example, it's completely useless to buy 2 million drones here in the Netherlands. So there's now a discussion on it. You have to think in completely different terms about how to use technology and innovation in your armed forces. Mm-hmm. That means that you, for example, buy 50,000 drones for training purposes. Mm-hmm. And if something is, if you need them in warfighting capability, then you should produce them. Now, think about what the consequences are. You have to be very flexible in your research in order to do this, and you have to be very flexible in your production capacities. Now, this is something for the Ministry of Defense. They are now thinking about it. Probably, we will end up in a situation where the Ministry of Defense makes an arrangement with you on how to quickly tap into your knowledge. That is exactly what's happening right now in Ukraine. And it will make arrangements with the industry how to own, for example, the production facilities in order to ramp up production very fast. Now, this is something you really need to think about at this university. Yeah, so also from a conceptual perspective.
Yeah, the ethics.
Well, the good news is that we are
already doing it, of course.
But no, that is something that we also have been invited, and all Dutch universities have been invited by the Ministry of Defense to help them think through these things. And the basis is as you pointed out, and we all agree, I think, there is something that we need to defend, and there is something that we can lose. And these are the core principles, our fundamental values are at stake. So there is something that we need to defend, and we have to rise to the occasion, and we have to see what we can do. But we have to do this while respecting our fundamental values and adherence to the international humanitarian laws, the Geneva Conventions, etc., etc.
Sure.
There are opening, because of the nature of the new technologies, artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, there are opening up some gaps, has been pointed out, in these extant laws, in international humanitarian law, that we need to study and we have to think about. This is exactly what we're doing in this commission that has been established, exactly because the UN mechanism doesn't work because of the veto, and it's stalled. So the debate about these autonomous systems is now kind of moved to another platform. This is the Global Commission that will be convening during the NATO summit on, what are the rules, international rules for these autonomous systems that could act without humans in the loop, in the ODA loop, as you say. So the UN General Secretary of the UN, Guterres, has asked for this commission, I'm a member of it, to report in the fall to the UN Global Assembly on what those principles should be. And hopefully it will get a lot of support in the General Assembly to see what kind of requirements we should impose upon the development of these new technologies.
But I would also ask the
but maybe one question.
Okay, one point.
You.
Okay.
Aren't you afraid that this will be a rather theoretical exercise?
No.
Because everybody should stick to the rules.
Yes.
And you cannot expect a country like Russia or even China to stick to the rules. Yeah. If this goes at the expense of your security, you don't stick to the rules. And a very important example is, also in NATO, is, for example, Finland, but also the Baltic states, just abandoned the landmine treaty. Mm-hmm. They stepped out of the treaty, which is one of the big achievements in the field also you're working on. This is about values, and landmines are there's something you simply do not want. But because the situation has changed dramatically, and the experiences in Ukraine has showed that landmines are extremely important to reduce the power of the adversary, Russia, to maneuver. And if you want to stop maneuver, and this is one of the prerequisites for victory, stopping the adversary to maneuver his forces in a certain area, and that is the reason why they built trenches and fortification and what have you. But the flip side is that you have to abandon, at least that is a conclusion drawn in the Baltic states and in Finland, you abandon this very important treaty. Yep. How to deal with that then?
Yeah. No, I agree, but there are still treaties that we stick to, like, for example, bacteriological weapons, chemical weapons. I know that there are exceptions, but they are affirmations of the rule. So it comes with great cost if you transgress or violate those. For example, you could think, AI, autonomous systems, making decisions when coupled to nuclear arms, right? So. Yep. These are cases where you could say, well, for sure there will be some agreement about these things. Or, you're mentioning the mines, but we've seen, for example, biometric identification in drones, where you throw a quadcopter here, and it has one of the photographs on your faces, and it will zoom in on you, and it will, come with an explosive payload and attach to your skull, and that's the end of the story. And it will be as difficult to get rid of it as a wasp, right? Like, so that these kind of applications, I think the UN General Assembly will be able to. And then there are, requirements that you could impose upon the fabrication, so that it's always, in terms of accountability, there is always, if you want to have these superior powers, then at least they should be accompanied by, you know, a kind of a regular scheme of attributing and apportioning accountability, so that when things happen, there is always, you know, a second debate to be had there.
Yeah. I would really invite the people here at this point.
Yes, sure.
If there's a question, I mean, there are perhaps many questions. I can't. We can't answer them all, but I'll just do it at random. Sorry if I don't see you. And I try to repeat the question. You, sir.
Yes. Rob de Wijk, thank you for your talk, and also for Boekenstein in de Wijk, which I think is really insightful. And I also listen to if I feel too cheerful. My question, considering the New World Order and the abject values that America is now embracing, and we need to adapt, why don't we reach out to China as Europe and also as a university?
Okay, well, that's a very clear question.
It's
I want to
really
repeat it first.
excellent question.
Let me.
That's one of the things.
Could we repeat it first? Otherwise.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And maybe I can't hear the question anyway. If no, why don't we reach out to China?
Yes. Yeah.
That's a short question.
Yeah.
That's one of the most difficult questions you can raise right now, and the reason is that China is supporting Russia in this unlawful war that is happening right now in Ukraine. At the same time, our trade relationship, talking about ethics, our trade relationship with China is huge, and America forces us. Trump forces us with a trade war to look at a different relationship with China. This is awful, what's happening here. In normal circumstances, the Europeans and the Americans would team up against China. Now Trump forces us to look at China, and that's exactly the reason why you ask this question, which is an excellent question, but it's very difficult to answer. Because at the same time you want to have some leverage over China to reduce its support for Russia in this Ukraine war. In my view, sometimes you don't have options. And I think this is a case that we don't have options anymore. Personally, I would like to see that we reduce our dependence on China as soon as possible, and that comes back to the question and to the discussion we had on European strategic autonomy. But that is impossible because we are so dependent on China. And for example, the Draghi report mentioned China as the shortest route to a sustainable economy in Europe, because they produce most of the green technology, so we need them. It's a matter, in my view, of balancing. It will be a balancing act. It will be a balancing act in a way that we should link our trade policies to their support on for Russia. What we did, and that comes also back to what we discussed earlier, we always start discussing human rights with China. This week, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands went to China. What did he do? He started to discuss human rights. Now you have to think about the issue. What is more important? Chinese support for Russia, or the human rights issue? What do you want to do? That's a really. I'm happy that I'm not the Minister of Foreign Affairs right now, because you have to make also this ethical.
It is. I think it is what it is.
It is what it is. Yeah, but. You have to make an ethical decision what your priority is. So this is really, and I understand that this is not a very satisfying answer, but this is what it is. In my view, we have no other choice but to use our trade policies in the context of what Trump's wants for us, to move closer to China, but at the same time moving closer and demanding that the support for Ukraine, for Russia, will diminish. That's probably what will happen. Yeah. But maybe I see it completely wrong.
Mm-hmm. Well, another question, because we're already a bit late because of all the problems. The gentleman with the glasses, I saw you first. Sorry, it's random. Sorry, people. Yeah, you shout a bit. I'm sorry. Yeah.
You started your talk about the shift from unipole to multipole, let's say, from the United States to maybe China, United States, Europe. That in itself, of course, does not have to be a wrong thing, does it?
The shift from unipole to multipolar world is in itself
no,
a
it's
wrong
what
thing.
it is, and it's not a choice. The lifespan of a superpower is roughly 80 to 100 years, so it's time for the decline of the US. There's also the golden age in the Netherlands lasted 80 years, something like that. So that's you see that more often in history, and this golden age for America will not last forever. This is what it is. But remember that a multipolar world is less stable than a bipolar world or a unipolar world. If you have a unipolar world, it's most stable. Then you have an hegemon that can do whatever it wants and can say to you, I don't like you, please behave and stop the war. But that is impossible in a multipolar world. It's more difficult. It requires a completely different attitude. It requires a completely different way of doing international politics, and it's more complex. And the chance that there will be mistakes, misperceptions, is much higher than in a bipolar world, which was dominated by nuclear weapons. You just mentioned nuclear weapons. This is what we had during the Cold War. Then the multipolar or tripolar or whatever world we will face today. It's more complex. Yeah. And more risky.
Let's take one more question. I saw the gentleman there with white hair. Sorry, yeah. I saw you first. Yeah.
You mentioned with the 15 adjustments, a bit all nuclear weapons, be realistic. I am very curious what you mean by that, or what it could mean.
Again, what is the question exactly?
What do you mean when you say, point number 7, be realistic about nuclear weapons?
All right, okay.
There's one of
you really read
one of the points.
You really read it.
Be realistic on nuclear weapons. Yeah. Be realistic on nuclear weapons. That was the question. What do you mean with that?
Be realistic on nuclear weapons. I should have explained that. That's a good question, by the way. Then, what it means is that nuclear weapons are only credible, and deterrence is only credible if you are willing to use them. Many politicians and the average people think that nuclear weapons are weapons that cannot be used, and that's not true. Deterrence can only be credible if you have the political will to use them. That is what I mean with the phrase be realistic about nuclear weapons. We are absolutely convinced, I'm absolutely convinced that Putin is willing to use them. And it almost happened a couple of years ago, in the end of 22, when the Ukrainians took back Kherson, which is in the southern part of the front. What happened then is that CIA Director Burns went to Turkey, had a discussion in Ankara with Narishkin, the FSB director, and they spoke about this. And the Americans made an assessment that there was a 50-50% chance that the Russians indeed would use nuclear weapons. When I said that on television, I was almost murdered. because I didn't know what I was talking about, and this was not true, because nuclear weapons were unusable weapons, and this was only scaremongering. It's not true. Biden explicitly mentioned this, and he said, look, it's probably more than 50-50. There's a conservative estimate we make, but he's willing to use that. So yes, deterrence can only work if you're willing to use them. It's awful, but that's a matter of fact.
What does that mean in practice?
They also have this doctrine where they can use it tactical, you know, so when...
Yeah, it's escalate to de-escalate.
Yeah. So, but in practice, that would mean that you go up the escalation ladder and perhaps use a tactical...
Well, I don't believe in the whole thing of escalate to de-escalate and whatever, and nuclear war fighting and things like that. I wrote my PhD dissertation on this long time ago, but the knowledge has not really developed since 30 years, because I wrote it 30 years ago, so a long time ago. But the thinking came to a standstill over the last couple of years, and that is because of the end of the Cold War. So what I did was study the concepts that were developed during the Cold War, and after the end of the Cold War, nothing happened. So intellectually, the whole debate came to a standstill, and that also explained that people have no clue what nuclear weapons are, and what the doctrines and the concepts behind the employment of nuclear weapons are. Now, this is something, it was really built on nothing. It was built on assumptions, and it was built on ideas and on war games that were not proven.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
the last word for...
I'm in a position to have the last word.
Well, the philosopher always has the last word, so...
But anyway, what we do know about, you know, evolutionary game theory is that if you kind of the pursuit of your self-interest in this kind of very strict sense will get us all bogged down in suboptimal results and at very large cost. If you look around, so that is something that we know for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's the biggest deterrent. The costs are too high. Yeah.
Well, then perhaps the very last word for you then, Rob. What is the main takeaway here for us as a University of Technology?
It's Darwin.
Darwin.
Adapt yourself. It's adaptation. That's what it is. And I'm of course aware what the Ministry of Defense asks you, and then also that Onno Eigelsheim, the Chief of Defense, is very active in this field. But the big question is, are you capable of adapting? Because I'm also a professor at Leiden University, and the bureaucracy is a nightmare at universities.
Well, that's well known here.
Yeah, that's well known. And that's the reason why I established my own institute years ago, because that allowed me to do the things I thought were important. And a think tank, which is more about applied research, by the way, is extremely adaptive. I can tell you a secret. So what happened when Trump came to power, all the major contracts were reconsidered. And we had a contract of €1 million, and it was gone within 3 days. Then you really need to be adaptive.
Yeah.
So within 3 days we had a compensation for the contract. But we could do that. But if a university cannot do that. So that's really a big problem. And if you really want to play a role in the new world order, and if you want to say yes to the request of the Ministry of Defense, you must improve your flexibility and your adaptivity. If not, it will be problematic. I hope you can do it, but that's one of the big problems in my view.
We have some strategic advisors here in the audience, so
I trust that. Yes, absolutely. Oh no, there's a lot of thinking, but we do also a lot of thinking, but it doesn't always result
in action.
In action.
Okay, let's leave it here. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.